The summer of 2003 in Louisville carried a heavy, sticky warmth that clung to everything it touched. The sun dipped low, melting into the horizon, and the sound of cicadas hummed across the quiet suburban streets of the Highlands. 16-year-old Emily Carter walked down Maple Avenue with a few crumpled dollars in her pocket, heading to the corner store for a soda before dinner. She'd done it 100 times before. That night should have been no different. Emily's ponytail swayed as she walked, her sneakers brushing against the uneven sidewalk. The faint smell of cut grass mixed with the sweetness of honeysuckle in the air. Neighbors sat on porches waving as she passed, but one by one as she got closer to the end of the block, those warm lights faded behind her. What followed was the stretch of road that everyone in town would later describe as too quiet. Across the street, a pickup truck idled for a moment, its engine humming low. Emily didn't notice. She was texting a friend, laughing about something silly that had happened at school. Within minutes, she vanished into the shadows of memory, never making it to the store, never returning home. Louisville changed that night. Parents locked doors earlier, teens stopped walking alone after dark, and the name Emily Carter became a whisper, half sorrow, half warning. Flyers plastered every pole and shop window. Volunteers searched the woods and riverbanks for weeks, but by autumn the posters were fading, and the police had nothing. The case slipped quietly into the growing pile of unsolved heartbreaks. "People don't just disappear," Emily's father, Tom Carter, said in a trembling voice at one of the last press conferences. "Someone knows what happened." But over time, the cameras stopped showing up, and the crowd of supporters thinned. Only the family remained, clinging to a hope that dimmed a little more each year. The town tried to move on, but Emily's absence left a mark that never healed. Kids grew up with her face burned into memory, her smile on those missing posters, her story retold whenever someone mentioned the dangers of being out too late. The store she was headed to eventually closed, its windows boarded, its sign rusted. It stood as a silent monument to everything that went wrong that night. 2 decades later, the story was nearly forgotten, buried beneath layers of routine and resignation, until one morning a headline appeared on a local news site. 2003 Kentucky cold case reopened after new evidence surfaces. The word spread like wildfire through the town that had tried so hard to forget. Before we continue unraveling what really happened to Emily Carter and the shocking arrest that would shake Louisville to its core, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. True stories like this one remind us how time may bury the truth, but it never erases it. The past was stirring again, and in the quiet corners of Louisville, people began to feel it. The echo of 2003 returning with a vengeance. The air in downtown Louisville felt different that morning, colder, heavier, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Sarah Mitchell sat in the corner of a small coffee shop, her laptop open, the faint aroma of roasted beans surrounding her. She had left her hometown behind years ago, but the headline flashing across her screen pulled her right back into it. New evidence found in 2003, disappearance of teen Emily Carter. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her reflection ghosted over the old photograph of Emily. They had been inseparable once, 2 girls chasing lightning bugs and sharing secrets on late summer nights. Sarah swallowed hard. She hadn't said Emily's name out loud in years. The newsroom buzzed in her ear when she called her editor, Rachel Monroe. "I need a few days," Sarah said, her voice steady but low. "Something's come up." Rachel sighed. "Let me guess, Louisville?" There was a pause before Sarah replied. "They reopened Emily's case. I have to go back." Rachel hesitated, then said softly, "Be careful. Some stories don't want to be told again." The drive south from Lexington was lined with empty fields, barns leaning under the weight of time. Sarah watched the highway roll by, flashes of memory breaking through like ghosts in the glass. The police lights, the endless flyers, the night Emily vanished. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. By the time she reached Louisville, the autumn light had begun to fade. The city had grown, but the air still carried that same quiet heaviness she remembered. Old brick houses lined the neighborhoods like silent witnesses. The convenience store where Emily had been headed was gone, replaced by a tire shop. its bright sign almost mocking the darkness of what once happened there. She parked near the old Maple Avenue corner and stepped out. The smell of rain lingered, and for a moment she could almost hear Emily's laughter echoing faintly in the distance. "I'm back," Sarah whispered under her breath, as if speaking to someone who could still hear her. Her phone buzzed. Tom Carter's name lit the screen. She hadn't spoken to him since she left Louisville. "Mr. Carter," she began, uncertain. His voice was rough, older, but unmistakably familiar. "They said you might come," he said. "You always said you would." "I read the news," Sarah replied quietly. "I want to help." There was a long silence before he answered. "If you're coming, come soon. There's something you should see." That night, Sarah checked into a modest motel on the outskirts of town. The neon light outside flickered against the thin curtains. She couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified: the hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of the old clock, the faint rustle of the wind. Louisville wasn't just her hometown. It was the place she had been running from, and now it was calling her back. Tomorrow she would face the people who had never forgotten, and the secrets that refused to stay buried. Tom Carter's house stood at the end of a quiet street on the south side of Louisville, its paint faded, its yard overgrown. The mailbox still bore the same name in peeling black letters: Carter. Sarah parked her car at the curb, hesitated, then stepped out into the cool morning air. Every step toward the front porch felt like walking back through time. When the door opened, Tom looked older than she remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes weary but alert. He stared at her for a long second before nodding. "You came." "I told you I would," Sarah replied softly. Inside, the house felt untouched by the years. The scent of old wood and dust hung in the air. Family photos lined the hallway, Emily smiling in every frame, frozen in youth. A pink backpack rested on a chair in the corner, as if waiting for its owner to return. Sarah's chest tightened. Tom motioned toward the kitchen table. 2 cups of coffee sat there already, steam curling upward. "I don't have much company," he said, "but I figured you'd come hungry." Sarah smiled faintly. "You still remember how I take it?" He stirred a spoonful of sugar into her cup. "Some things don't fade," he murmured. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then he leaned back and said, "They found something, didn't they?" "That's why you're here." Sarah nodded. "They reopened the case. The police haven't said much, but someone sent me a message, a name I didn't recognize, said there were things we never knew." Tom's jaw tightened. People always claim to know something, but 20 years later it's never the truth, it's guilt or it's gossip. "I just need to see for myself," Sarah said. "Whatever this new evidence is, it might finally tell us what happened to her." He looked at her with tired eyes, the kind that had learned to live with ghosts. "You think you're ready to dig all that up again?" he asked quietly. "Because once you start, you can't put it back." "I was the last one to see her that night," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't keep pretending that doesn't matter." Tom didn't answer right away. He rose from the table and walked down the hall, returning with a small wooden box. He placed it between them. Inside were newspaper clippings, police letters, old notes from search volunteers, 2 decades of desperate hope. "I kept everything," he said. "Every call, every tip, every lie." His voice broke. "They told me to stop asking questions, but I couldn't." Sarah carefully lifted one of the faded photos, a picture of her and Emily, arms around each other, grinning in front of the Carter house. "She trusted everyone," she whispered. Tom's gaze hardened. And that was her mistake. Louisville's full of people who smile at you in church and keep secrets behind closed doors. "Some people around here don't want this story told again." Sarah met his eyes. "Then that's exactly why I have to tell it." Detective Mark Reynolds sat behind a cluttered desk at the Louisville Police Department, his gray hair catching the fluorescent light. The office smelled faintly of old paper and stale coffee, 2 decades of cases, most solved, some not. When Sarah walked in, his eyes lifted slowly, narrowing with recognition. "Mitchell," he said, leaning back in his chair, "didn't expect to see you again." "Neither did I," Sarah replied. "But I heard the case was reopened." Reynolds exhaled through his nose. the sound half irritation, half fatigue. You heard right. Cold Case Unit got a new tip. They're combing through the old files again. He rubbed his temples. Not that there's much left to find. Sarah studied him for a moment. He looked heavier than she remembered, burdened not by weight, but by memory. You were lead investigator, she said quietly. You believed she ran away. I believed what the evidence told me, Reynolds shot back. No sign of struggle, no witnesses, no prints. You want a villain, but sometimes there isn't one. That's not what her father thinks, she said. Reynolds sighed, glancing toward the hallway to make sure no one was listening. Tom Carter hasn't stopped calling this department since 2003. I respect his pain, but grief can twist memory. Sarah leaned forward. And what about your memory, Detective? Does it twist too? The silence between them was sharp. Finally, Reynolds opened a drawer and pulled out an old case file, its edges yellowed, corners bent. You want to see what 20 years of nothing looks like? Here. He slid it across the desk. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside were faded photos, witness reports, and a missing person form with Emily Carter's smiling school portrait clipped to the top. The handwriting in the notes was uneven, rushed, desperate. Some of these statements are missing, she said, and half the evidence logs are incomplete. Reynolds' eyes darkened. You think I don't know that? Things went missing. Records, tapes, even a suspect interview. I filed complaints, but they were buried. The department wanted this case gone. A missing white girl story that scared the whole town. Didn't look good for Louisville. Sarah felt her stomach turn. So you stopped pushing? His jaw clenched. I didn't stop. I got told to move on. He hesitated, his voice softening. And I did. That's my regret, Mitchell. I moved on. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. Rain streaked the window, blurring the city skyline. Sarah tapped the photo of Emily with her finger. You could help me find what they buried. I know you still care. Reynolds looked at her, a flicker of something, guilt, maybe hope, crossing his face. Even if I wanted to, I don't have clearance anymore. Then help me off the record, Sarah said. No headlines, no noise, just the truth. He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a faint, weary nod. You'll wish you hadn't asked for this. Sarah stood, gripping the file. Maybe, she said, but I already do. The next morning, Louisville woke beneath a sky the color of tin. The wind carried the smell of wet asphalt and the faint echo of church bells in the distance. Sarah drove down Preston Highway, her hands tight around the steering wheel, following a direction she hadn't taken in 20 years. The closer she got, the slower she drove, as if the road itself resisted letting her arrive. When she finally stopped, the old convenience store stood before her, abandoned, its windows boarded, its sign half fallen. The name, Marty's Market, was barely legible beneath layers of dust and graffiti. Sarah stepped out, her boots crunching over bits of broken glass. She could almost hear the bell over the door ringing, the way it had that night. Emily vanished. Detective Reynolds arrived minutes later, his car pulling up with a low rumble. You sure this is worth it? He asked, stepping beside her. She was supposed to make it here, Sarah said quietly. If she disappeared after that, then this place saw her last. Reynolds sighed, scanning the building. Store's been closed since 2005. Owner moved to Indiana. We questioned him back then, nothing useful. Then we talked to him again, she replied. The two of them circled the building, peering through gaps in the wood. Inside, dust floated in narrow beams of light. Sarah noticed a tangle of wires above the door. Security cameras, she said, pointing. There were cameras here, weren't there? Reynolds frowned. Yeah, but the footage was gone before we even got the warrant. Owner said the system auto-erased every 24 hours. Did you believe him? Sarah asked. His silence was answer enough. That afternoon, they found the former owner, a weary man named Martin Keene, working behind the counter of a hardware store in Jeffersonville. He looked startled when he saw them. Haven't heard that name in a while, he said, rubbing his hands on his apron. Emily Carter. We just want to ask about your old store, Reynolds said evenly. Specifically about the security tapes. Martin hesitated, eyes darting toward the other customers before lowering his voice. I was told not to talk about that, he whispered. By who? Sarah pressed. He swallowed hard. Someone from the department. Said it was better to let things be. I got a visit a day after she went missing. They asked for the tapes, said it was routine. I handed them over. Never saw them again. Reynolds' face darkened. What did they look like? Plain clothes? One had a badge clipped to his belt, Martin said. You think I'd forget? That girl's picture was everywhere. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her arms. You remember his name? Martin shook his head. He never gave it. But he drove a dark blue pickup. Reynolds met her eyes, a flicker of realization passing between them. Sarah's pulse quickened. So the last person who handled those tapes wasn't you. It was him. Martin nodded slowly. And if you're smart, he said, his voice barely a whisper, you'll stop asking who he was. By late afternoon, the sun hung low over Louisville, casting a dull orange glow across the quiet streets. Sarah sat in her car outside a small auto repair shop, the address scribbled on the note Reynolds had given her. Ben Alvarez. The name stirred a faint memory. He'd gone to high school with her and Emily, the quiet boy who always stayed on the edge of things. She took a deep breath and stepped out. The shop smelled of oil and metal, the rhythmic clang of tools echoing from inside. Ben looked up from under a car hood, his face older but familiar, his dark hair streaked with grey. For a moment he just stared, recognition dawning slowly. Sarah Mitchell, he said. Didn't think I'd ever see you again. I could say the same, she replied. Mind if I talk to you for a minute? He wiped his hands on a rag, motioning toward a small bench near the wall. I heard they're reopening the case, he said. You writing about it? Maybe, she said carefully. But right now I just need the truth. Ben's expression shifted, hesitation mixed with something deeper. Truth doesn't change what happened. Maybe not, Sarah said, but it changes what people believe. He looked away, jaw tightening. I already told the cops what I saw. Then tell me, she pressed. One more time. He exhaled slowly. I was walking home from my uncle's shop. I saw Emily across the street near the old gas station. There was this truck, a dark blue one, creeping behind her. I thought it was someone giving her a ride. Did you see who was driving? She asked. Ben hesitated. No, I just remember the sound. The engine revving once, then nothing. When I turned back, she was gone. Sarah leaned forward. You told this to the police? He nodded. Yeah. Detective Reynolds took my statement. A week later, they told me it didn't match the timeline and dropped it. Reynolds, standing near the doorway, frowned. We never dropped it, he said, but someone sure made sure it disappeared from the report. Ben's gaze darted to him. Then why did I get a visit from some guy in plain clothes telling me to keep quiet? Said my memory was unreliable, that I'd get dragged into something ugly if I kept talking. Sarah felt her throat tighten. When was this? A few days after the search ended, Ben said. His voice dropped lower. He knew things only the cops should have known. He mentioned my uncle's name, my job, even my car. That's when I stopped answering calls. The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Sarah could feel the truth circling closer, its edges sharp. Do you remember anything else? Anything at all? Ben's eyes flicked to the window. Just one thing, he whispered. That truck. Same kind they used to drive in the sheriff's department back then. Reynolds froze. The words hung heavy in the air, heavier than the smell of oil or dust. Sarah looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. You think someone inside knew? Reynolds didn't answer. His silence said everything. The next day broke grey and heavy, the kind of morning that pressed against the windows like a warning. Sarah walked beside Detective Reynolds through the back entrance of the Louisville Police Headquarters. The corridors smelled of coffee and old paper, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing off the linoleum floor. Reynolds's badge still carried enough weight to open doors most people couldn't. You didn't hear this from me, he muttered as they turned a corner. Technically, we shouldn't be here. I stopped worrying about should the moment you handed me that file, Sarah replied. The cold case archive was buried deep in the basement, behind a heavy steel door and a wall of forgotten filing cabinets. The air was cool, musty, filled with the faint odor of mold and dust. Reynolds flipped a switch, and a weak light flickered overhead. Boxes lined the room, thousands of them. Decades of tragedy catalogued, labeled, and left to fade. Sarah scanned the rows until she found the one marked Carter, Emily, 2003. She pulled it down carefully. Inside were scattered reports, a few photographs, and a brittle evidence log. But something was wrong. "There should be at least 3 volumes," Reynolds said, frowning. "Only one's here." Sarah turned a few pages. "Half these entries are missing. Look, April 14th, 2003. That's the night of the disappearance, but the sequence jumps straight to April 20th. Reynolds clenched his jaw. That's 6 days of missing reports. He moved to the metal cabinet against the wall, tugging at the drawers until one jammed halfway open. Inside was a folder labeled Internal Correspondence. He scanned through it quickly, then froze. "Here," he said, sliding a paper toward her. It was a memo dated May 2003, signed by a deputy chief, requesting reallocation of sensitive materials regarding case 03-1276 for departmental security reasons. Sarah's pulse spiked. "So they buried it on purpose?" Reynolds nodded grimly. "It looks like someone high up didn't want this case reopened, and whoever gave that order had the authority to erase evidence." She flipped through the remaining documents until a single name caught her attention. A witness interview marked deferred. Officer Daniel H. Weller. "Who's that?" she asked. Reynolds went still. Weller was a deputy back then. "Quiet, hard-working, transferred out the same year the case went cold." "Transferred where?" "Tennessee," Reynolds said slowly. "Small county near the border." Sarah stared at the file, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. Why would an officer be listed as a deferred witness? Reynolds looked at her, his voice low. "Because sometimes the people who should be questioned are the ones writing the reports." The silence that followed felt heavy, pressing down on both of them. Sarah could hear the faint hum of the light above, the slow drip of a pipe in the corner. She closed the folder carefully. "If these files were meant to stay buried," she said, "then we just dug up something someone didn't want us to find." Reynolds met her eyes, his face pale. "Then we'd better be ready for whoever comes looking for us next." The drive to the county outskirts was long and silent. Rain had started to fall, thin streaks against the windshield, blurring the outlines of barns and telephone poles. Sarah sat beside Reynolds, the folder from the archive resting on her lap. The name Daniel H. Weller was scrawled across the top page, faded but unmistakable. "Weller," Reynolds said quietly, keeping his eyes on the road. "He was one of ours, kept to himself. Solid on paper, good at following orders. I never thought twice about him." Sarah turned the page, scanning the sparse information. "You said he transferred out the same year the case went cold. Did anyone ask why?" "People said it was burnout," Reynolds replied. "He lost his wife that spring. After that, he requested reassignment to a smaller department. No one questioned it." Sarah's voice was calm, but her pulse wasn't. "He was assigned to evidence handling during Emily's case. His signature's on the chain of custody form for the missing tapes." Reynolds didn't respond. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. "If that's true, then I signed off on it too. I trusted him." They turned off the highway onto a narrow road lined with sycamores. The rain had eased into a mist, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. A mailbox came into view, the name Weller etched in worn lettering. The woman who answered the door was older, frail but sharp-eyed. "Mrs. Weller?" Sarah asked gently. "We're here about your son, Daniel." Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the door. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," she said softly. "What do you want with him?" Reynolds spoke first. "We're reopening a case from 2003. He might have handled some evidence connected to it." Mrs. Weller's expression flickered. Fear, regret, then resignation. "You think I don't know?" she whispered. "He told me not to speak of it, said it was for my safety." Sarah's breath caught. "He told you about the Carter case." The old woman's gaze fell to the floor. "He came home that night different, shaking. Said he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. He was afraid of the people he worked for, of what would happen if he said a word. Reynolds took a step closer. What did he see? She shook her head. He never said, but he kept a box, locked. Told me if anything ever happened to him I should burn it. Sarah's voice softened. Do you still have it, Mrs.? Weller hesitated, then disappeared into the hallway. When she returned, she carried a small metal box, its surface rusted, edges dented. She set it on the table between them. He died 5 years ago, she said. Heart failure, they said. But he never stopped looking over his shoulder. Sarah reached for the box, her fingers brushing the cold metal. Did you ever open it, Mrs.? Weller's eyes glistened. Once, she whispered, and I wished I hadn't. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed, each second stretching like a warning neither of them wanted to hear. The motel room felt smaller that night, its walls pressing in like the weight of everything Sarah had learned. The metal box sat on the table, unopened. Rain tapped gently against the window, steady and rhythmic, as if daring her to break the silence. She traced a finger over the lid, the rust rough beneath her touch. Reynolds sat across from her, exhaustion lining his face. We shouldn't open it here, he said quietly. If what's inside is what I think it is, we'll need to be careful. Sarah looked up. Careful stopped being an option when someone buried this case 20 years ago. He exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand over his jaw. You think Weller died naturally? She shook her head. No. His mother said he was scared. That kind of fear doesn't just disappear, it ends one of two ways, silence or consequence. Reynolds leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You realize if we push this, someone's going to push back harder. Sarah didn't answer. She flipped the latch on the box. Inside were envelopes, a small cassette tape, and a faded photograph of Emily standing near the corner store, smiling. Behind her, barely visible, was a dark blue truck. Her stomach tightened. He kept proof, she whispered. He couldn't destroy it, but he couldn't live with it either. Reynolds studied the tape. This could be the original footage, the one that vanished. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. No caller ID. She hesitated, then answered. Hello? A man's voice, low and deliberate, spoke on the other end. You need to stop what you're doing. Her pulse spiked. Who is this? You think you're chasing justice, the voice continued, but you're digging up things that were buried for a reason. Reynolds mouthed, Who is it? Sarah held up a hand, her throat tight. If you know what happened to Emily Carter, then you should want this out. The voice chuckled, dark and cold. Some truths don't set people free. They destroy what's left of them. Then the line went dead. Reynolds reached for her phone, scrolling through the recent calls. No record. Burner, he muttered. They're watching us. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. They know we opened the box. They know everything. He turned toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to glance outside. The parking lot glistened under the streetlight, but one vehicle stood out. A dark pickup parked at the far end, engine idling. Reynolds's voice was tense. Stay away from the window. Sarah's heart hammered. You think it's them? I think someone's making sure we remember what happens to people who ask too many questions. The rain began to fall harder, pounding against the glass. Sarah backed away, clutching the tape to her chest. They can scare me all they want, she said, her voice low but steady. I'm not stopping. Reynolds looked at her, something fierce flickering behind his tired eyes. Then we do this right, he said. Tomorrow we take this to someone we can trust, quietly. Sarah nodded, though deep down she knew trust was running out fast. The morning after the call, Louisville was draped in fog. The streets looked washed out, the world muted and grey. Sarah hadn't slept. The tape from Weller's box sat on the motel table, rewound but unplayed. Reynolds stood by the door, arms crossed, eyes shadowed with fatigue. You're sure about this? He asked. If we go through with it, there's no turning back. Sarah nodded. We didn't come this far to stop now. He handed her a small flashlight and a folded map. Weller's transfer records list a property near the Ohio River, remote, private. He bought it right after he left the department. My gut says he hid something there. They drove in silence, the city fading behind them. The highway curved toward open country, the landscape giving way to fields slick with dew. As they neared the river, the air grew colder, heavier. Sarah could feel it, the weight of something waiting to be uncovered. They parked at the edge of a gravel road that disappeared into tall grass. The sound of the river was faint at first, then clearer, rushing steady beyond the trees. Reynolds moved ahead with deliberate steps, his flashlight cutting through the fog. Sarah followed, her boots sinking into damp earth. "Why here?" she murmured. "Why hide something in a place like this?" "Because nobody comes out this far unless they're looking for trouble," Reynolds said. They reached a clearing near the water. The ground was uneven, littered with driftwood and broken glass. Reynolds scanned the area, stopping near a patch of disturbed soil. "This wasn't like this last time I was here," he said quietly. Sarah knelt, brushing away the dirt. Something metallic glinted beneath the surface, a small rusted locket on a broken chain. She lifted it carefully. Inside, behind cracked glass, was a tiny photo of Emily Carter. Her breath caught. "It's hers," she whispered. "She wore this every day." Reynolds crouched beside her, his voice low. "Then this place is part of it. Someone came here after she vanished." The air felt colder now, the fog curling thick around them. Sarah turned the locket in her hand, her mind spinning through every piece of the puzzle. "Weller must have found this," she said. "He couldn't turn it in without exposing whoever took the tapes." Reynolds straightened, scanning the tree line. "We need to get this tested. If it's been here since 2003, it's physical proof she was brought out here." Sarah's heart pounded. Then maybe she was closer than anyone thought. Reynolds met her gaze. "You understand what this means. The department will have to reopen everything, interviews, reports, all of it." "I understand," Sarah said. "It's time they stopped pretending she just vanished." He nodded once. "Then I'll make the call." Sarah looked out at the river, the current moving dark and fast beneath the morning fog. She thought of Emily's laughter, the sound of cicadas that summer, the promise that they'd always look out for each other. "We found something," she whispered, almost to herself. "We finally found something." The discovery at the riverbank spread through the department faster than Sarah expected. Within hours, the evidence had been sent for testing, and the results came back sooner than anyone believed possible. The locket was confirmed to be Emily's. DNA from a faint strand of hair inside matched her comb from home. But the real shock came from what clung to the metal. Traces of soil, oil residue, and microscopic paint flakes. Navy blue automotive paint. Reynolds stood in the hallway outside the lab, the report trembling slightly in his hand. "There's your truck," he said quietly. Sarah took a slow breath. "Weller's connection?" "Confirmed," he replied. Records show the deputy assigned to evidence transfer owned a dark blue Ford pickup, registered under Daniel H. Weller. Her heart thudded once, hard. "He wasn't working alone," she said. "Someone made sure those tapes disappeared." Reynolds nodded grimly. "We're about to find out who." By noon, Louisville Metro Police announced a formal arrest. Former Deputy Daniel Weller, posthumously linked to obstruction of justice and evidence tampering in the Emily Carter disappearance. The department also confirmed a second warrant had been issued for a retired officer living in Tennessee, a man named Frank Holden, Weller's direct supervisor in 2003. When the news broke, it tore through the community like a storm. Sarah watched the coverage from her motel room, the TV light flickering against the wall. Reporters stood outside police headquarters, microphones shaking in the wind. After 2 decades of silence, Louisville finally had names. Her phone buzzed. It was Tom Carter. His voice was low, unsteady. "They finally did it," he said. "They finally said her name again." Sarah swallowed hard. "They did, Tom, and they're saying yours too." He went quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think this means we'll know what happened to her?" She hesitated. "It's a start, but I don't think this is the end." Later that evening, Reynolds met her at a diner near Bardstown Road. The neon lights flickered against the rain-slick pavement outside. He looked exhausted but alert. "Holden's in custody," he said. "They brought him in without incident." "What's he saying?" "Nothing. He's refusing counsel, refusing statements. Just sits there staring at the table." Sarah stirred her coffee absently. "He knows more than he's admitting." Reynolds nodded. "They always do." A group of locals sat in a nearby booth, talking in hushed tones. Words like justice, finally, and Emily Carter floated through the air. For the first time, Sarah noticed a different sound in Louisville, relief mixed with disbelief. The case that haunted the town for 20 years was no longer unsolved, but even as she listened, something in her resisted the comfort. The locket, the truck, the missing tapes, all of it pointed to a cover-up bigger than one man. Reynolds caught her expression. "You're not celebrating." Sarah looked at him, eyes sharp. "Because we haven't heard the truth yet." He didn't argue. The rain outside had turned steady, rhythmic, an echo of 2003 that refused to fade. The interrogation room smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. Sarah watched through the one-way glass as Detective Reynolds stood across from Frank Holden, the retired officer whose silence had stretched through the night. His grey hair was neatly combed, his posture straight, his eyes flat and unreadable. There was no hint of guilt, only calculation. Reynolds leaned forward. "You were Weller's superior. You signed the order to secure the Carter evidence. You were in charge when the tapes disappeared." Holden didn't flinch. "You're wasting your breath. I've got nothing to say." Reynolds tapped the table with a pen. "We found Emily Carter's locket near your property line in Tennessee. You want to tell me how that got there?" The old man's jaw twitched. "You people think you've got this figured out. You don't know half of it." Sarah could feel her heartbeat quicken behind the glass. There was something in his tone, a hint of anger, yes, but also fear. Reynolds sensed it too. He leaned closer. "Then tell me, what don't we know?" Holden's eyes shifted toward the corner of the room, as if measuring the walls for how far his words might reach. "Do you ever try to clean up someone else's mess?" he asked softly. "Do what you're told because it's your job. That's what this was. A cleanup." Reynolds's voice hardened. "Whose mess?" Holden let out a long breath. "Daniel Weller came to me the night that girl went missing. He said he'd been called out to the store by someone higher up, someone who said the Carter case was sensitive. He was told to pick up the security tapes before anyone else could." He paused. When he got there, he saw something he shouldn't have, someone he recognized. Sarah pressed closer to the glass, her breath fogging the surface. Reynolds's voice was steady now. "Who did he see, Holden?" Holden's hands tightened into fists. "Tom Carter," he said finally, "the girl's father." The room went silent. Reynolds froze. Sarah's stomach dropped, her mind struggling to process the words. Reynolds spoke again, slower this time. "You're saying Tom Carter was involved in his own daughter's disappearance?" Holden looked down at the table. "Not the way you think." "It was an accident. At least that's what Weller told me. Said he saw them arguing behind the store. The girl slipped, hit her head. Weller panicked, called me. He didn't want to ruin a good man's life, so I helped bury it." Sarah's throat tightened. No. She remembered Tom's trembling hands, his cracked voice, the years of searching. "That can't be right," she whispered under her breath. Reynolds's voice cracked the silence. "You covered it up for 20 years, let an entire town suffer while you protected him." Holden's eyes glistened. "He lost everything that night," he said. "His wife left. His daughter died. He was already serving his punishment." Reynolds pushed back from the table, disgust flickering across his face. "No," he said quietly. "He just didn't have to face it." Sarah turned away from the glass, her chest tightening. The truth had finally broken the surface, but it wasn't the justice anyone expected. Sarah drove straight to the Carter's house without speaking. The air outside felt thin, almost brittle, as if the world itself might shatter under what she now knew. Her mind replayed Holden's confession again and again, the words gnawing at her disbelief. Tom Carter. It didn't make sense. The man she'd seen grieving for 2 decades couldn't be the same man behind Emily's death. When she knocked, the door opened slowly. Tom stood there, shoulders stooped, his face pale. "You heard," he said quietly, as though he'd been waiting for her. Sarah's throat was dry. Holden confessed. He said you were there that night. He didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning her in. "You deserve to know," he said. "You always did." The house was dimly lit, the walls lined with fading photographs. Emily in a softball uniform, Emily blowing birthday candles, Emily laughing in the backyard. Tom sat down heavily at the kitchen table, hands clasped tight. "She found something she shouldn't have," he began. "Something about a man I trusted." Sarah frowned. "Who?" "A friend of mine," Tom said. "Roger Clay. He owned the freight yard back then. Emily had a part-time job cleaning offices for extra money. One evening she came home upset. Said she saw Roger taking cash from a truck driver, something about falsifying shipping logs. She didn't understand what it meant, but she said she was going to tell me." He paused, his voice trembling. "I didn't believe her at first. I thought she'd misheard. But when I went to talk to Roger, he panicked, said the company couldn't afford a scandal. That's when I knew she was right." Sarah felt her stomach twist. "So what happened that night?" Tom's eyes filled with tears. "She left to go to the store. I followed, planning to take her home and keep her out of it. But Roger showed up instead. He must have been watching her. They argued behind the store. I got there too late. She tried to run, slipped on the gravel, hit her head on the curb. It happened so fast." He covered his face with his hands. "Roger froze. I froze. Then he told me no one would believe it was an accident, said it would destroy both our families. He called someone he knew in the sheriff's department. Weller showed up that night. He took the tapes, cleaned up the scene. They told me to go home and forget what I'd seen." Sarah's voice shook. "And you did?" Tom looked up, his expression hollow. "You think I've slept a single night since then?" he whispered. "I wanted to tell the truth 100 times, but by then it was too late. Too many people were involved. The truth was poisoned." Sarah's chest burned with a mix of anger and pity. "She trusted you to protect her." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "and I failed her." The silence that followed was unbearable. Sarah rose from her chair slowly, her mind spinning. "This isn't over," she said. "It can't be." Tom didn't look up. "It's been over for 20 years, he said softly. "You're just the only one still brave enough to dig it up." The story broke at dawn. Sarah's article hit the front page of the Louisville Courier-Journal before sunrise, her words cutting through 2 decades of silence. By noon, every news outlet in Kentucky was repeating the same headline: "Truth buried in Louisville. Emily Carter's death tied to local corruption." The town that once whispered about her name now shouted it across every radio station. Sarah sat in her car near Cherokee Park, engine off, watching the morning fog drift over the trees. Her phone buzzed non-stop, calls from national reporters, podcasts, networks asking for interviews. She ignored them all. The weight of the truth still felt raw, almost too heavy to hold. Reynolds joined her an hour later, carrying 2 coffees. His face was drawn, his eyes tired but steady. "They're calling for an independent investigation," he said. "State police are already in town. Clay's company is under audit, and Holden's statement's gone public." Sarah took a sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "Tom Carter?" "He turned himself in early this morning," Reynolds said. "Walked right into the precinct with a written statement. Claimed responsibility for hiding what happened, but swore it was an accident." Sarah stared out the windshield. "He'll never stop blaming himself, but at least it's not a secret anymore." Reynolds nodded. "Holden will face obstruction charges. Clay's being questioned as we speak. The whole department's under review. It's chaos, but it's the kind of chaos this city needed." She looked at him, her voice low. "And what about you?" He gave a faint smile. "After today, I'm done. Retiring for real this time. I have been carrying ghosts long enough." A silence settled between them, comfortable, almost peaceful. The wind rustled through the park trees, carrying the smell of wet earth and the faint hum of cicadas. That afternoon, Sarah visited Tom at the county jail. The small visitation room was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. He looked older, worn but calm, as if the confession had finally loosened the chains he'd carried for 20 years. "I read your article," he said softly. "You told it right. You didn't make me a monster." Sarah met his gaze. "You were a father who made a terrible choice. People will judge you, but at least now Emily isn't just a missing face on a poster." "She's a person again." Tears welled in his eyes. "Thank you for giving her that." When Sarah left the building, the late-day sun was breaking through the clouds, warm and golden. She drove past the old Maple Avenue corner, the place where it all began. The tire shop still stood where the store once was, its parking lot full of cars and noise. Life had moved on, but the air there felt lighter now, less haunted. Her phone buzzed again, Rachel Monroe's name flashing on the screen. Sarah answered. "You did it," Rachel said. "The story's everywhere." Sarah smiled faintly. "It's not just a story, Rachel. It's closure." "Then maybe it's time to rest," Rachel replied. Sarah looked out the window at the fading sunlight. "Maybe," she said. But not yet. A month later, Louisville had begun to breathe again. The headlines had shifted to news stories, but Emily Carter's name lingered in the air, spoken softly at coffee shops, in classrooms, and during Sunday sermons. Her picture, once a reminder of pain, had become a symbol of truth finally set free. Sarah parked near St. James Cemetery, just as the morning light cut through the mist. She carried a small notebook under her arm, the same one she'd used to document every lead, every interview, every sleepless thought. The air smelled of wet grass and river wind. Tom Carter had been sentenced the week before, 3 years for obstruction and tampering, suspended under parole. Reynolds had retired quietly, his name cleared, though his eyes still carried the shadow of everything they'd unearthed. Life had gone on, but it felt changed, cleaner somehow. Sarah walked between the headstones until she reached Emily's grave. The flowers there were fresh, someone had visited recently. She knelt down, brushing a few fallen petals from the stone. The carved letters shimmered faintly with dew. "Hey, Em," she said softly. "I thought about what you'd say if you could see all this. I think you'd laugh first, then probably scold me for digging too deep." A faint smile crossed her lips. "But you always said truth mattered more than comfort. You were right." She placed the notebook on the ground, flipping it open to the first page. The handwriting was messy, the ink smudged. "I came back here to remember," she whispered, "to remind myself that silence only protects the wrong people." Behind her, footsteps crunched on gravel. Sarah turned to see Reynolds approaching, his hands in his pockets, his face calm but thoughtful. "I figured I'd find you here," he said. "You planning to stay in Louisville?" She shrugged. "Maybe for a while. There's still more to write about what happens after the truth comes out." He nodded slowly. "You did good, Mitchell. Not many people would have stuck it out." Sarah looked back at the headstone. She deserved someone who would. Reynolds' gaze softened. "You gave her voice back." A long silence stretched between them, gentle and unhurried. The wind rustled the trees, carrying the faint sound of church bells from downtown. Sarah closed the notebook and placed it gently at the base of the grave. "That's for you," she said. "Everything we found, everything we faced, it's yours now." She stood, brushing the dirt from her knees. Reynolds tilted his head toward her car. "You coming?" "In a minute," she said. "Just need to say goodbye." He nodded and walked away, leaving her alone with the quiet. Sarah took one last look at the stone. The sun had risen higher now, burning away the mist. Light fell across the grave, bright and golden. "Thank you for leading me back," she whispered. "You changed more than you'll ever know." Before leaving, she looked toward the horizon and felt for the first time a sense of peace, not because the past was erased, but because it was finally seen. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and continue following our series of real stories that remind us why truth still matters. And don't forget, click on the video suggested on your screen to continue the journey.